Cool. Welcome everybody. Tinkerbell contributors meeting, March 15th. I'll share the agenda in the chat. If you don't have it, please feel free to follow along over there. Yeah, are there any new faces that are interested in introducing? I don't know if that's the case.
Hey, I'm Chris.
Oh, hey, Chris.
Slightly low on my camera here. Yeah, I'm new to this community. I work for Amazon with Pooja and Aravind here, who is on the call. So yeah, we're using Tinkerbell and whatnot, as you know, and I'm hopefully going to be working with Micah, who's got that proposal out to carry that forward as well. So yeah.
Awesome. Great to have you. Welcome. All right, so let's move on here. We've got no items under show and tell. Does anybody have any show and tell items they're interested in bringing up? All right. No worries. Topics, nice. We've got a few of them here. Let's see. I don't see Mike on the call. Maybe he's joining shortly. Maybe we should move on. Arvind, do you want to maybe jump in and we'll go back to Micah if he shows up?
Yep, for sure. Yeah. So can you guys hear me fine?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. So basically, I just created like an issue on the PB&J repo. So I know we have had these discussions before in like previous calls about like maybe having like a formal integration of PB&J with the entire Tinkerbell stack. So me, Micah, and some of the folks, we just wanted to like maybe kick things off, like start the conversations off. So I just created an issue over there on the PB&J repo with very roughly thought out ideas. We just wanted to like maybe get those ideas out and like, of course, like come back later with a more formal proposal, like hopefully in the upcoming weeks. And yeah, like bring some, if we want, like we can talk about those ideas now, or like we could look through them and discuss on the issues. Just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. I think throwing an issue is a great idea. I've got a couple of thoughts I'll throw out there real quick. I like option 2, I guess, PB&J as a Kubernetes controller. But I also like the PB&J as a Kubernetes service. But I think it might be interesting if the controller code maybe was built in such a way as kind of like a library plus CLI, then maybe PB&J proper could just import it as well, and then you could toggle at runtime, and you might be able to get two birds with one stone there.
Yeah, definitely. So the with the service idea though, like and I think like now Micah's here, like so what we were kind of thinking was we didn't know like who would actually reach out to PB&J if it was actually like still a gRPC service. Would the Tinks, like someone from the Tink server, like ask it to do the power on, or if we are imagining with CapT, would CapT ask it to do the power ons and stuff? Like I mean, those questions kind of came in mind. And like with the controller model, yes, we don't have any of the, the hardware CRD with the BNC information, or maybe have like workflows that have like PB&J specific tasks on them and stuff like that, obviously. But those are just like ideas like that we could maybe formulate. So yeah.
It feels like there's a significant architectural design decision to make, right? Kind of, you have the event modeling architecture, or you have some sort of orchestrative way to go out and specifically call it. And there's pros and cons to all of those. Personally, I kind of like the idea of just watching events. I feel like it's very abstracted and decoupled, and it doesn't, you don't need to write client server, right? You don't have to have both of these sides, but you're right, there are some interesting things to talk about in terms of like, well, when does it get kicked off? Who kicks it off? Do you want to orchestrate it at a certain point in time versus just watching things? I don't know. I think personally, whoever has the first use case probably should get to decide most of those, because I don't know. I can't think of one at the moment, actually. I don't know, Nahum, can you think of one, or Chris, internally at Equinix where we would use? I don't know if we have one yet. So being you're kind of a first ascent, so to speak, where you're kind of, I feel like you probably could be free to just kind of pick what makes sense for your use case. So.
So, I mean, for our use case, we have actually used it a lot with CapT though. So like we would like have it model with CapT, but CapT, like we don't need it to be responsible for like, triggering and, in charge of doing PB&J calls per se. Maybe if like similar to how like, like a worker just picks up and does stuff, if PB&J could also like pick up workflow tasks and just do it itself, that would be better. But yeah, like, those are just ideas and things that we can maybe make more formal in a proposal later on.
Yeah, it's starting to feel like one possible starting point could just be the library functionality to listen over to Kubernetes, right? And then from there, you can build around it different types of ideas. Sorry, Nahum, I feel like I cut you off there. Go ahead.
My thoughts are slightly more tangential. So one thing I've been looking at lately is thinking about the current architecture of like the gRPC calls and how we currently have requests that come in and we hand back a transaction ID and then you check back in on those. And I'm starting to have concerns about those in certain distributed systems where if PB&J restarts, like stuff gets lost and stuff, or like you can't run two of them or whatever. So just putting that in people's minds, if you're poking around in PB&J, like I'm very open to thoughts around how we could revisit that design. Number one. Number two, yeah, I think figuring out that, yeah, certainly I think within Equinix Metal, we're still, yeah, a little ways away from being able to move the calls to PB&J out of our proprietary API into the open source world. So I think if there are existing open source use cases, I'm very open to just like seeing what they are and how we can move forward with those. Those were my two thoughts. I think I had another thought, but I've lost it. So if I remember it, I'll bring it up.
So I had a thought on the controller approach. I'm wondering, with a workflow today, it's kind of modeled as a Tink worker is going to go ahead and run that, right? Does it become blurry if you introduce a controller that's only going to run a subset of things on a workflow? Because the semantics of a workflow seem to be tied to a Tink worker. So if you did have a controller that's kind of stepping in and deciding to only do a portion of that, how does that convolute anything in the way that we model the workflow today?
It's a great question. I think in my mind, like the least optimal option is you could shoehorn PB&J into the existing schema of a template / workflow and have some fake image and wire what you want to do through environment variables on an action, like on a task or something. I think that's probably the wrong abstraction. I think you can always extend the template image, right, or the template schema to not just have so you have what actions and tasks, but to have another field on an action that's like maybe more, you can extend it to be PB&J specific, or maybe more, yeah, something else, rather than try to shoehorn it into the run this container type thing. That's where like the CLI option doesn't require this architectural change. Basically the third option, PB&J just becomes a hub action and it gets executed on a worker somewhere, not necessarily on the box, like some PB&J worker, right? And you sort of do, so you do use the existing schema, but you say, hey, run this PB&J image on some worker somewhere, maybe not on the box, and reach out to this BMC and again, configure those inputs with environment variables or something. There's this isn't a full design doc yet, so there's that stuff is to sort of be like fleshed out and discussed, but I think that's kind of directionally, that's probably the idea.
So before I ask any more questions, how far do we want to take this conversation now before a formal proposal?
Arvin, I think you wanted to just get like to put this on people's radar, get people to comment on the issue, then to kind of give some points. Like Nahum, you had a great point about distributed system transaction IDs. Add that stuff so that can be incorporated into a proposal and addressed.
Also, like if someone had like a more tangential idea like that didn't fit into any of these models, like maybe picturing PBNG as something else, like we could definitely like mention it in the issues and we can like discuss more on it. I just wanted to like kickstart the discussion as soon as possible before we like get too deep into it,
Yeah. Okay. I think I remember my last point. So you had mentioned, I think you mentioned CAP-T. Like I do think there is a lot of value in, just as there has been value in the sandbox of like, here we can spin up a thing and like if you boot a worker, it'll install Ubuntu is like fully documented. I think here's having if you put BMC credentials in a place for if you have like a handful of machines, here like the minimal example, like you have 3 physical machines and you have your BMC credentials and you put them in a thing and then you run this CAP-T thing, like the power commands will happen. That as a sort of sandbox v2, like a CAP-T sandbox, like whatever you want to call that. I don't know. I haven't played with CAP-T, but like 0 to Kubernetes, including power control as a demo is incredibly powerful, especially also for like, again, like in terms of as a community, getting home lab users interested in like, oh, I have 3 machines that have BMCs. I could put those credentials in a place. It would be cool if then like Tinkerbell could turn that into a Kubernetes cluster. As an end goal is I think an interesting thing to help guide design thoughts.
Yeah, so actually regarding that, like we actually did like I think like maybe 2 or 3 meetings ago, I demoed like a integration with the current state of CAP-T with the current state of PB&J. I also like have a PR out like a couple of days ago for those changes, like just so people were interested. I mean, I didn't bring it up right now because that wasn't the topic to discuss, but yeah, like what you said, like we have already like tried and modeled in a way, but that gives a lot of business logic control to PB&J, to CAP-T, which we don't know if we really want, like in a way, but yeah, we could definitely look at that. If you go to the CAP-T repo, you'll see my PR out there and we can discuss more on that.
Let me throw one last thing in here. Actually, a couple things. I like the decoupled nature of like watching Kubernetes resources, and I would love for us to figure out like if we could use that as a stepping stone to change what we have. I know this is like a longer term big change thing, but I think it would be cool to be able to change to that kind of an architecture so that workflows were more decoupled in that nature, because then you could introduce lots of different things without having to mess too much with what a workflow is, right? If you create this decoupled. Now, that's very abstract at the moment, and I don't think there's a concrete path quite there yet, but I think this could potentially get us to a nice place. And then real quick, Nahum, you brought up the async PB&J nature. So it's not, I'll take an action item to put documentation around this, but you can run, if you run PB&J with an external data store persistence layer, you can do multiple front end, so to speak, PB&J workers, and you can get the kind of consistency expectations around like distributed or multiple PB&J instances running. So let me throw together some docs to get that out there to make that more clear, because that is available at the moment. You just need to throw in an external kind of data store to that. And then the last thing I will throw out there is that, so architecturally there are 2 parts to PB&J, right? There's PB&J itself, I would consider more of just the gRPC interface. Internally inside of PB&J, there's this library called BMC lib, which that does all the heavy lifting. And so I think that is advantageous because we can decouple these 2 things from each other, right? You can pull out the BMC lib, put it into any one of these 3 proposals that you have, Arvin, and and run with it, right? You don't necessarily need the gRPC spot, but I thought I'd bring it up that there is just a very distinct architectural difference between those two parts.
Yep, that does make sense. Thanks, guys. This was a really good discussion.
Awesome. Any final thoughts, questions, comments around that? Cool. All right, let's jump back up. Micah, do you want to go refactor Tink? Yeah.
Yeah, so I just posted a pull request and would love some review on it. I probably have a few more tweaks to do. It's just under the code coverage target. Tink worker today is it could use a refactor. And
that's a nice way to say it.
Yeah. So what I've done is I didn't refactor the workflow logic or workflow handling logic or execution logic. That does need to be done, but I didn't touch that yet. Before touching that, I figured it would be a lot easier to refactor and write tests for when we have when it's easier to stub things out. So what I did was create some abstractions around all the calls to Docker. So the container start, pull, stop, wait for stop, pull image, all this kind of stuff, and just wrap some interfaces around it and created some implementations. And I also externalized that package. It was an internal literally internal package name, so it wasn't exportable or importable. Because as I'm doing the Kube API work, I wanted to have a virtual worker that has just all that stuff stubbed out with the real worker logic to test against the API, right? And so rather than try to put that all in the Tink API PR, I just thought I'd pull this worker stuff out and get that through, because that's a little bit more like isolated and could be reviewed more easily separately. I can include the virtual worker in this PR as like a second commit. I can do it in a follow-up PR. Like I've got, it's really simple. It's just basically importing worker with a bunch of fakes for Docker API calls. Yeah, I'd love a review to get that in maybe like this week if possible. That'll help me with just getting the Tink API stuff together. So yeah, if anyone has any like comments or just whatever, please leave those on the PR. I'd love to get feedback. Yeah.
Awesome. Can I ask a real quick question? I see you've got maybe it's just a moved file, but you've done some registry.go stuff. Did you change any of the ability to like have more than one repo, or okay,
no,
you just kind of just left that because
it's just really like, it's basically a bunch of like variable name changes and like abstraction changes. I did not change any functionality.
Okay.
It's still like, logging container logs to standard out, but instead of just format.println, it's println f to a writer, and the default writer is os.standard out, stuff like that, to where the functionality should all be the same. Unfortunately, we don't have existing tests to verify that, but the functionality is all the same. It's just basically like the worker struct was using a concrete Docker client type to make all its calls. So I changed that to a composite interface of two of the Docker interfaces for the methods that were called, right? And then my Docker client wraps the Docker APIs with some of the the worker specific call or like things that need to be passed, right? The helper methods around those Docker APIs. So again, not changing any of the functionality, not changing like interaction with Tink API. it's just basically to sort of have a little bit more sanity around like calling the Docker API, other internal method calls. There was just a lot of like passing like the Tink client around to down the call stack and loggers down the call stack. And so I just tried to like reduce some of that. And I'm trying to think what else I did. And make the like initialization, the struct initialization a little bit more like reusable. So it's got like some, you know, Veradic argument of worker options. So instead of having to like pass 10 different types in the new worker call, it's like, no, here's a bunch of options that you can set with option functions. So that in the actual Tink worker, it's a, you know, a certain set of things, but in a faked Tink worker, in an end-to-end test where I do have actual gRPC connection between this, you know, worker logic and a Tink API, it can still make a gRPC call, but it's just not going to be talking to the Docker client, and doesn't need. And I added a few things like, you know, make privileged containers optional, make like change the data directory that the worker writes to. One other change I haven't made in this PR, but probably will in a follow-up PR, is like the worker writes intermediary data to a directory. So again, abstracting that into like a writer buffer, like a buffer or something, right? Like to where you could actually write it to a file, or you could have it in memory. So you don't, in a test, it doesn't actually have to do real file operations.
I would, my cautionary tale here is if you don't have any workflows right now that use this intermediary data, personally, I wouldn't touch it, because I think we should drop it, because I don't know if anybody's using it, and I think it's not a full thought. It was kind of a half. So again, my unsolicited, I'd maybe just leave that, because I would hope we would just kind of drop that entirely.
I left it. I would love to drop it. I'm not. It complicates the API. So it'd be great even if we want to drop it from the Tink API as well. But I for this PR, I didn't touch it. So if you, yeah. Okay, great.
Just this is really cool. I especially like the throwing the ability to change kind of the output of the logs. I think that's huge, because that could potentially help us solve some of our hook problems where we don't have any logging right now. We never plumbed in like Ozzy had to syslog. Like now we could even introduce a CLI option to send it over to some remote logging service, which would be amazing, right? We could bring back in the nice functionality of, okay, you can actually see your logs without having to go onto the console of the machine to check them out. So that's really cool.
Yeah, so I can show really quick, just to your point, Jacob, just illustrative, like in the root of the Tink worker, it used to be create a connection, create the worker, process workflow actions, but there's a little bit more setup now, like create a Docker client, container manager, and container logger. So as you're saying, you wanted a syslog container logger, make a syslog container logger and pass that to the worker. The worker doesn't really care. And then the implementation of that is just, that's the logger test, is to write to a writer. And the new container logger just by default specifies OS standard out. Like you said, if you wanted syslog, like we could make the writer an argument here and make a syslog writer, right? Like not crazy hard. So yeah.
You did. I want to bring it up too, just so everyone, if you didn't catch it too, you've done this not only for logging, but now you've done this for our container runtime. Now you can write a container D one, you can write a Kubernetes one. This is really great setup. So I will definitely be checking this out to review it quickly. So thanks, Micah.
Yep.
Awesome. Any other thoughts, comments, questions around this?
Actually, slightly unrelated. I think regarding the thing that you were asking, if Micah's PR was involving using like different registries or not, depending on the local registry stuff, I think Pooja dropped, but she was working on some changes for that. I think there's not a PR out for it, but maybe one pretty soon.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I know she mentioned it last community meeting. I haven't seen it, but yeah, I'm very excited for any place anyone deciding to open up that functionality. I'm very excited for it.
For sure, yeah.
Awesome. All right, any other thoughts, questions there, or tangential stuff as well? All right, cool. Let's see, Nahum, you want to go by Pixie Boots or
Yeah.
Pixie Dust?
This may not be the best audience for it, so I'll mention it, and if people have thoughts, that'll be great otherwise. I'm looking at changing one of the features that we enable in the iPixie binary build. And so the good thing is it's like self-contained in the iPixie Dust library. So it's like just change that line there. And if it's good, then like it's nice and simple. We just check in the new binaries. The hard part is the testing side of that in terms of certainly as a community, we don't currently, I think for pretty good reasons, we don't like build artifacts for Boots PRs. We only build and ship artifacts for like fully merged commits. So in order to test this change in iPixie Dust, I need to like do an I have a draft PR that is marked like do not merge. You can see in the Boots repo of like override the iPixie Dust to point at my fork at a particular commit where I've already checked in the binaries as well. And then I was able on my own machine to like rebuild the container. But also like, I mean, this is in terms of like the degree of testing and stuff that we want on iPixie Dust changes, I guess is the question. So like some of this has to do with like internal workflows within Equinix Metal, and I'm going to be talking to people internally about that. But as a community, I don't know what kind of stuff we want to put in place for like, how have you tested these iPixie Dust changes? And like changing the iPixie binaries that we as a community ship for everybody, especially since so like this is specifically around LACP, which like definitely within big data centers, LACP is the kind of thing people have on their network interfaces, much less likely to be seen in a home lab. So yeah, if people have thoughts or suggestions, great. If not, I will continue figuring out how I want to do the testing on this.
Yeah, that's a curious one because it's just a Go library. So how do you, yeah, that is. I mean, this adding functionality to our iPixie binaries like this, it doesn't feel like it would break. Like you add LACP, right? It's not going to mess with anybody's like small home lab, right?
I would hope not.
So, yeah, but that's the kind of the point you're getting at, right? It's like, well, how do you know that, right? How do you? That is an interesting question. We do, so I do know that iPixie Dust, if I'm not mistaken, hopefully it does, it has a CLI inside of that repo as well. So you can run iPixie Dust on its own. There's a potential where we could add some GitHub Actions or some other build system, right, to do some live tests maybe, right? And you could run them in, we could maybe run them in Equinix Metal, or you could run them in GitHub Actions to kind of simulate both, you know, Kimu or something like that. I don't know if that's helpful, but yeah, maybe something like that.
Yeah, if it doesn't if it doesn't break Kimu, assume that it's probably okay.
Right. Yeah, cool. that's rough. Sorry you're having to jump through hoops for that.
I mean, I think we've been lucky that like the main branch of Boots has generally been kept stable and able to just be run straight up in production, and like, but like for potentially big change, and like, I don't know, this may not actually be a big change and I may be being overly careful, but at the same time, there will someday be other bigger changes and it's worth being thoughtful about those things.
Yeah, that's fair. Cool. Any other thoughts, comments, questions around that? Okay.
I have a separate topic. I didn't add it to the agenda. I do have. I mentioned earlier. I do have a Tink API PR open. So I'm still working on that. But if reviewers could take an early look at it, There will be some changes still, but I'd love like a review. One issue I might have to restructure it. One issue I'm hitting is that like the Tink AP like gRPC API code has this, there's the database abstraction, and that right now is backing against Postgres, and SQL is great at transactions. Kubernetes doesn't really have transactions, right? And so in the current API, there's all these embedded like get workflow by name or whatever. So for a given like worker report action status gRPC API, there might be like 5 or 6 SQL commands, and 4 of them might be like get workflow before it actually updates the workflow. And that is a little bit problematic with Kubernetes and like caching, and just latency modification, right? If I have like a request that comes in from Tink worker and it's report action status, task 1 complete, right? It's going to make 4 get calls before it does a update.
Is that server side that's making these get calls you're talking about?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh.
Like because I mean, whether it's Kubernetes get or SQL get, like describe, right, or select, and so my point here is just that it's not super. The gRPC trying to re-implement all the Kubernetes changes under the DB interface is technically possible, like to do with code, but the distributed system nature of it doesn't work well because Tink API is basically a shim on top of the Kubernetes API. So I might be, rather than reusing the DB interface, just re-implementing the methods for the gRPC API. So that's my call out on this current iteration of that Tink API PR, just to folks have a heads up that the current one looks like try to leave Tink API, the gRPC changes almost undone, like the business logic, and push the storage down to DB interface. But given the semantics of Kubernetes and how it's different than SQL, it might mean re-implementing some of that business logic, but with more optimized for Kubernetes distributed system type thing than the current state. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like you may also have like, so I haven't touched Tink server at all. I wonder if you are in this work, like discovering like maybe the way we have it implemented is suboptimal.
It is.
Right. And yeah, I wonder whether, yeah, I mean, I currently do not have the bandwidth to look into these sorts of things right now, but like, it makes me wonder like, oh, should we at some point be revisiting the current, like the way it's using Postgres and stuff like that, because that sounds I'm scary at scale.
Right. Like what I'm not sure if it's worth doing in this PR is just because if we're going to throw Postgres out,
yeah,
like, do I need to refactor that? And then like, yeah.
Right. But
so
yes, I think like, it's always interesting when you're finding these sort of like, oh, an architectural decision that was made when someone was first writing the first implementation that may or may not have then been faced with scale, and like what happens when you, because when you say like, oh, there's like a read amplification of 4x before the write happens in a busy system, that doesn't seem ideal to me.
No, it's not. Yeah. So that current PR structure may change just because it's hard. The also the current business logic does some of these read before writes as well, which is fine. Like you'll do that in Kubernetes too, but just it also there's different message types. Like there's the front end message type on the gRPC API. There's the like, and then there's the like protobuf or not proto. There's like the I don't remember which types there. There's another package where there's just different types that are presented between the database and the gRPC package. And so like that struct doesn't really mean anything in Kubernetes, because if you just have the Kubernetes CRD, like do you need this middle translation layer between CRD and front end API of this other structure? So that's another benefit to not trying to use the DB interface, is have to like do all this conversion of like CRD to intermediary form to protobuf.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. That's helpful. If anybody has time, definitely check that out. I could post, I think the chat, this is the PR you're talking about, right? 573, right, Micah? Yeah, KRM/Tinker. Okay, all right. I think the chat comes along in the recording in the future. I don't know. Hopefully it does. If it does, it's in the chat. If you're watching this, it's there.
I'll put it in the agenda.
Oh, perfect. Even better. Thank you. Awesome. All right. Any other general topics anybody's interested in bringing up? Big ones, small ones, short ones, long ones?
I do have a teeny tiny
Okay.
thing. There was a problem with an upstream dependency in the Tink repo. I fixed it temporarily, and they've now fixed their problem. So there's this tiny PR up, but it's just been lingering for over a week. So I'll post it in the chat here real quick. If y'all wouldn't mind going and just getting that merged, just gets it off my to-do list.
594.
Correct.
Sweet.
And at some point, we might want to consider changing to distribution/distribution as opposed to Docker distribution, because they're not going to come out with any new versioning for this older module. That's why we get the plus incompatible, because it's not a Go module, and they've actually moved to v3. So the main line is actually the module name is distribution/distribution. So at some point, might want to switch over.
Sweet, sounds good. Yeah, it looks good to me. I approved it. I'm just doing a rebase from main, and once that goes through, I'll stamp it through. Thanks, appreciate that, Chris. Awesome. All right, any other topics to bring up? I'm hoping to have, let's see, 2 weeks from now. Yeah, I'm hoping to have a. I've been working on a lot of distributed tracing, open telemetry stuff with Nahum as well. It has helped me quite a bit with kind of the iPixie dust, so TFTP and our DHCP stuff. I'm hoping to do a little show and tell in the future. But I say that just because I could use, if anybody has time or Cycle's interested, there is a Tinkerbell/DHCP repo that has a few PRs that could really use some eyes. So just a short call if anybody has time as well, would appreciate that. All right, let me see. I'm pulling up triage party items for discussion, since we do have a few minutes still here left. Let's see, what do we have? Looks like, yeah.
While you're doing that, I was glancing at the Tink pull requests. Just I'm on call this week and dealing with some other stuff. But if I get out from under all that, I've been helping Manny work on the making TLS optional for throughout the whole thing. So And I was most recently looking at like the hook build process because we need to wire everything all the way through to hook to the container that runs on hook and everything. So keep an eye out for that, folks. If that those PRs will probably be hopefully ready for review again sometime soon.
Very cool. Nice. Yeah, that man, thank you. You and Manny.
Manny's done most of it. Like I did
well,
one
thank
proof
you,
of
Manny,
concept
out
like
there.
ripping it, but yeah, Manny gets the credit.
Lot of touch points. So yeah, thanks for that work. Okay, just looking real quick at triage, it looks like we still have one item with a discussion label, if I'm reading this correctly. Let me post that in the channel. As I'm looking at it, I'm wondering why we didn't maybe remove this actually, because I feel like we've discussed this a bunch, but I guess I'll bring it up anyways. We do have a little bit of time. This is in Boots. It's issue 178 around default workflows. There's been some topics or some comments back and forth about this idea, but yeah, if everyone has a chance real quick, maybe just check that out, or if you already know and you want to discuss or have any thoughts around this, please feel free to shout them out.
Or comment on the PR.
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
the proposed issue rather.
Yeah.
If like just about like regarding like PRs, I did mention it before, but I can share it here in the chat as well. Like I do have like a PR out with what current integration that we have with CAPT and PB&J. It might be interesting to take a look at. Let me just get the link real quick. But also like linked it with an issue, like explaining the current state of things. So please feel free, guys, to leave some comments.
Oh, nice. Yeah, 147. Yeah, I glanced through this one. Oh, let me, yeah. Oh yeah, that's very tied to some of the ideas you brought up already in PB&J, right? So.
Yeah, kind of. But those ideas like needed a lot of changes across like, Tink, PB&J, and like, the whole design. So this is what like, I could just get working with the current state of PB&J and how CAPT is modeled as well. Like it uses gRPC clients to talk to Tink and all that. So similar approach.
Oh, this is more around that demo you did a few weeks back, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. I mean, this might change like once we decide how we want to remodel everything, but just like so people can look at like what we have done and maybe get feedback.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. So just jumping back to 178, I kind of want to ask the question, does anybody on the call right now have need for this idea in any of its forms for a default workflow? I don't know if Nahum, I don't think internally we have this need, do we at the moment? It doesn't seem like it, but I'm just curious if others have it just in general.
I mean, if we were running Tink in production already, then like I could see use cases for us in terms of onboarding new hardware. Like, oh, brand new machine shows up that we haven't seen before, ingesting it into the system.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. Anybody else have any use cases right now? I feel like we might not have the right audience if nobody has, yeah, any of these.
We don't on our use case. We explicitly let our users define the template, and we have a default that we present them, but it's up to them to hack it, and if they don't want that, so that's before even registering anything, the template with the Tinkerbell stack. So yeah, there's no need for this to be, for us at least right now that I can see. Does that tie in with what you think, Aravind?
Yeah, kind of. So like Chris was saying, we actually like a model, like however the current state is, like we have our own default template that we like provide to people and stuff like that. So that, I mean, this would be helpful, but like maybe not exactly for our use case, but yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'll yeah, maybe I'll comment on the issue and see if these people are available to discuss in a different forum, maybe, and we can maybe just take the discussion label off this issue, just because I think maybe getting the right people in the right in the room would be a good idea here. So okay, that ends up being our only discussion item I can tell. Anybody have any other general topics or questions, or I like this where people bring up tickets, like, please look at my tickets. I think this is a good idea to keep things moving along. Any other last things like that anyone have? All right, thanks y'all. Appreciate you showing up. Just a quick pitch for next Tuesday, next week, same time for triage party if you're interested. But yeah, see y'all in 2 weeks or online. Take care.
See you guys.